Thanks for tuning into the Texas Scratch King channel. Please don't forget to subscribe, like and share this video. This video is for educational purposes only. We will always be honest as possible and show you the good, the bad and the ugly side of the game dog world if you're not taking safe precautions. This is the mind of a dog fighting investigation group. Let us begin. Dallas, TX. If it can be said that there is a capital of dog fighting, the illegal, usually organized, gamblers' game that is growing from coast to coast, then it is probably in Texas. On any given weekend, up to a dozen fights might be held in and around Dallas, Austin, San Antonio or at other well-guarded locations elsewhere in the state. A clandestine dogfighters magazine, Pit Dog Reports, with a secret mailing list, is published near Dallas. Several big pit dog breeders live in the state, and some of the biggest matches, called conventions, are held here. An inquiry by the New York Times has found, moreover, dogfighting here, as well as in some other areas, is not simply the weekend diversion of a handful of men with their own special idea of sport. There is high-stakes gambling, prostitution, puppy peddlers, as in oftentimes the sires or dams of the pups would have a match. And if they won the match or even lost game, every pup would be sold usually. Also, you would see illegal liquor sales, suggestions of drug sales and allegations. It's not uncommon for a participant to pay off rural police for protection. Many spectators armed. Violence is not uncommon. Many spectators at fights carry pistols. And there have been 2 gangland-style assassinations of well-known dogfighters within the last year. If you consider the general level of fighting itself, the number of fights, the number of breeders, the level of peripheral activities such as prostitution, then Texas would probably be no. 1, said Duncan Wright, executive director of the American Dog Owners Association, which has been investigating dogfighting. Dig deeper into the moment. Moreover, Mr. Wright added, it would probably be the focal point of this kind of activity across the entire southwestern United States. Frank McMahon, chief investigator for the Humane Society of the United States, agrees that the state is an important link in a nationwide network of dogfighters and gamblers. Mr. McMahon visited Texas recently to look into the situation. In Massachusetts, Don Lambert of the State Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals noted that an investigation in the Boston area that led to the arrest and conviction of 2 important dogfighters had turned up evidence of close links to Texas breeders and fighters. Despite this, the majority of law enforcement officials here seem for the most part unaware of the extent of dogfighting and related illegal activity, or not particularly interested at the moment. According to several confidential sources, dogfighting has slackened considerably because of recent public exposure of the activity and because of police interest in the 2 slayings. The bodies of the 2 men were found last Dec. 30. On the bank of the Trinity River outside Dallas in the town of Farmers Branch. Their hands were tied behind their backs, and both had been shot through the head. The 2, Louis Richard Halliburton and William Marshall Reed, had appeared prominently in 2 underground dogfighting publications, the Texas Pit Dog Reports and Pit Dogs, published in Florida. According to the police, the 2 men were last seen attending a cockfight in Farmers Branch the night before their bodies were found. Their hands had been tied with neckties taken from the house where the fight was held. Many of the participants in dogfighting are also involved in cockfighting. The snitch gave 2 reasons for the killings. One version holds that the 2 men were killed because they had stolen someone else's fighting dog, another that one or both had provided information about a dogfight that was raided. Yet another account, given to the police by a prominent dogfighter, was that the men were involved in a hijacking unrelated to the fights and were killed in a squabble over the proceeds. In any case, although some matches or conventions are family affairs, with men, women and children present amid something of a carnival's atmosphere, participants say that others are settings for barely subdued violence. A young Austin man who had been involved in fighting, until his winning dog was mysteriously shot to death, said that quarrels were common and he had been present at a fight at which there had been shooting. In Dallas, the snitch of a champion fighting dog agreed to an interview on condition of anonymity. I'll tell you one thing that I always see at these fights. And that's pistols, he said. Asked how fights were set up, he said, well, the first thing you do is buy the law. They give a local law enforcement official $500 to act as a protector, to warn the participants if there is to be a raid. If there is going to be a raid by the state cops, he said, the fighters will get the word. The snitch also said that participants in the bigger meetings often traveled some distance to take part, with those involved in the fights themselves bringing from 1 to 10 dogs. He said they came from California, Utah, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Wisconsin, Massachusetts and Indiana, among other states, where fighting is said to be common. They have organized meetings. The dog owner gave the following description. In other words, the snitch. This is what he had to say. For the bigger meetings, they talk about and negotiate with up to a dozen matches. Participants rent a block of motels and arrive as a group in campers and in trucks with dog cages on the back. Word of a convention is sent out by mail from a well-guarded list, giving only the day of the meeting and the city where it is being held. The precise time and location could be discovered only by word of mouth or by telephone among dogfighters, some of whom use code words for identification. A big fight might draw from 300 to 400 persons, although many smaller ones, involving possibly only a few participants, are held constantly. One fight was held in a bedroom of a home. At the big fights, however, admission costs, collected by the promoter, range from $3 reported by the Texas source to $9 or $10 reported elsewhere. The average bet in the big Texas fights is about $500. The source said, although it sometimes ranges much higher. Smaller contests might involve bets as low as $5 or $10. But that's just friendly hometown stuff, he said. Food and beer is usually sold at the bigger fights, at $1 a can, and occasionally whiskey. He disclosed. Asked about prostitution, the source said, yes, there always seemed to be a lot working the crowd. However, he said, there was no evidence of drug sales. Although Pit Dogs magazine, in an editorial deploring the shootings of the two Texas men, said that drugs and related activities were giving dogfighting a bad name. As for the fights themselves, the snitch said the dogs were weighed and then usually washed thoroughly to ensure that their coats had not been treated with anything that would poison the opposing animal when it bit. Then, he said, the dogs were placed in the pit, usually a portable plywood affair, and the fight conducted until one dog was defeated or killed. A final that might take from 30 minutes to more than 2 hours. Normally, the dogs, usually specially bred pit bulls, will have been fed a high-protein diet that keeps their weight down and, the snitch said, given little or no water before the fight to dehydrate the animals somewhat. This is said to reduce bleeding. Although some dogs are killed, most fights end when a dog curs out, or turns, in a fight, refuses to fight any longer. You can always tell when a dog is going to cur out, the snitch said, because his tail hangs down, or he tucks it under. When he's fighting, it's straight up. Colonel Wilson E. Spear, head of the Texas Department of Public Safety, had this to say. He said that except for a raid last year on a fight in the Fort Worth area, there had been little action against dogfighters. Most other law enforcement officials said they were unaware that dogfighting was going on, although some said they knew of cockfights. Thanks again for listening to the Texas Scratch King channel. Until the next time, my friends, as we always say, never submit to life and keep scratching every time.